Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that honestly blew my mind when I first started looking at the data. We are going to explore how a series of seemingly innocent coded emojis, yeah, literally just emojis on dating apps, is directly linked to an urgent nationwide public safety crisis. We're talking about the digital architecture of modern drug markets, and more importantly, the startling real-world consequences that are spilling straight out of our phones and right into our physical neighborhoods. It's a fascinating and frankly, a pretty alarming look at how technology that was originally built for human connection has been entirely repurposed.
To really wrap our heads around the massive scale of this issue, we absolutely have to start with this staggering number: $250 billion. Just let that sink in for a second. That figure represents the current national backlog cost for remediating meth-contaminated housing in the United States alone. And here's the kicker: that is just the backlog. It's estimated that another $15 billion is added to that pile every single year from brand new contamination. So right out of the gate, we need to understand that this isn't just some niche problem happening somewhere else. It is a massive, crushing economic and environmental burden, and it falls squarely on the shoulders of landlords, taxpayers, and completely unsuspecting communities.
Now, a crisis of this macro-level magnitude, it actually begins at a deeply micro level, tucked away within specific dating apps, using a highly specific subcultural terminology. Have you ever heard the phrase party and play, or P&P? Well, it originated within gay dating app ecosystems like Grindr and Scruff. It basically refers to combining sexual encounters with heavy stimulant use, specifically methamphetamine. If you're scrolling through these apps, you'll often see it written out as partying, but with a very deliberate capitalized Y or sometimes a capital T. And that's not a typo, folks. That is a direct nod to Tina, which is the common street name for crystal meth.
What happens next is where the tech gets heavily manipulated. Dealers use this constantly evolving matrix of emojis and selective capitalization as basically a secret decoder ring to openly advertise illicit drugs. See, because the platform's algorithms are programmed to automatically flag explicit words like meth or drugs, the users and the distributors, they just pivot emojis. It is completely wild how an ice cream cone, a diamond, or a little cloud emoji suddenly transforms a standard dating profile into a literal digital billboard for narcotics. This linguistic subversion allows dealers to completely bypass automated platform moderation. They are essentially operating in plain sight, and the algorithms are none the wiser.
And when you compare this to the old way of doing things, the data points to a stark contrast that perfectly explains why this crisis is just exploding. I mean, think about traditional street dealing for a second. It's highly visible, it's restricted by physical geography, and it is fraught with obvious immediate dangers. App-based dealing, on the other hand, it offers what is basically an Amazon Prime effect for narcotics. It provides these low-friction, totally anonymous, hyper-localized transactions that completely strip away the visible danger of a traditional street corner drug market. A user can literally find a distributor living right in their very own apartment building. It reduces what is normally a high-risk felony to just a few casual swipes on a smartphone screen.
So, as we pan out from this digital epicenter, we have to ask a really critical question. We know this behavior is heavily concentrated on specific dating platforms right now. But does this digital sanctuary effect remain isolated to the users of those specific gay dating apps, or does it spill over into the broader public?
Well, according to the sources, it absolutely does not stay contained. Not at all. Researchers highlight that bisexual bridging and mixed sexual orientation networks serve as direct pathways that expose the much wider non-queer population to the normalization of meth use. For instance, bisexual men who use these specific apps and engage in PMP may also have female partners. This creates a very direct vector for the spread of meth use, as well as the transmission of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections straight into heterosexual communities. The data strongly suggests that the psychological drivers of addiction, things like loneliness and isolation, they are entirely universal. And the drug supply chains, they certainly don't discriminate by sexual orientation. They just want to market.
And the really crucial point to take away here is that this repurposing of digital architecture for illicit drug markets is no longer just a niche dating app problem. It is a widespread phenomenon that is actively infecting mainstream platforms. Just look at the numbers from the New Zealand Drug Trends Survey. Drug sales are happening heavily across general social media right now. 54% of respondents noted seeing sales on Facebook, 48% on Snapchat, and 32% on Tinder. The cultural scripts and the digital distribution methods that were pioneered in these niche corners of the internet have successfully and aggressively scaled up to the broader public.
Section 1. The tidal wave. Hidden tolls on traditional communities. Let's look at the macro-level impact.
Let's bring this all the way back to housing. 5 million. That is the number of U.S. housing units that are currently contaminated with hazardous methamphetamine residues. Remember that $250 billion figure we started with at the very beginning of this explainer? Well, this is exactly what it represents on the ground. Millions of homes.
To put that into perspective visually, that equates to a staggering 4% of all American housing stock being poisoned. Now I know, 4% might sound like a relatively small slice of the overall pie, but practically speaking, that leaves an estimated 13 million non-users dangerously exposed to toxic chemicals right inside their own homes.
And this third-hand exposure is an ongoing, almost totally unrecognized environmental health crisis. Here's how it works. When meth is smoked, these toxic residues stick to the walls, the carpets, the ventilation systems, and they stay there for years, long after the original user has packed up and moved out. A brand new family moves in. The environmental data points out that this disproportionately harms unsuspecting families, infants, and young children who obviously have absolutely no agency in their exposure. They are constantly exposed to neurotoxic chemicals simply by breathing the air and touching the surfaces in their own homes. It's terrifying.
Beyond the walls of these homes, the ripple effects documented by these sources are actively eroding community cohesion. The research points to severe child neglect that is completely overburdening the foster system. We're seeing intergenerational poverty stemming from families being entirely destabilized and billions upon billions of dollars drained from public health care just to treat meth-induced medical emergencies. And at the community level, the data tracks direct, measurable spikes in violent crime, domestic abuse, and property theft that are tied directly to funding these app-facilitated addictions. The societal cost is just astronomical.
We also have to remember that the digital avatars selling these drugs, they are real-world criminals. During a major 6-month undercover operation down in Florida, brilliantly dubbed Swipe Left for meth, by the way, authorities didn't just find people typing emojis on their couches, they found serious heavy firepower. Seizing assault-style rifles alongside hundreds of doses of meth illustrates that these digital platforms are actively facilitating the movement of extremely dangerous weapons and physical violence directly into our residential neighborhoods.
Section 2. The Digital Sanctuary. Why platforms fail. So, why can't the tech companies just stop this themselves? The answer really lies in the fundamental architecture of the apps themselves. While the platforms do attempt to moderate public profiles, by banning explicit words, the actual drug solicitations quickly retreat into the unmonitored digital sanctuary of encrypted private messages. Once two users match based on those coded emojis we talked about, the entire conversation moves to a private inbox, and automated text filters just can't reach in there without severely violating user privacy laws. It is precisely in these disappearing, totally private chats where the actual dealing occurs every single day, completely hidden from the platform's automated text filters. Furthermore, the sources argue that this digital sanctuary breeds something incredibly dangerous: the casual dealer. Because the apps significantly lower the barrier to entry, they allow regular everyday users, people with normal day jobs who don't fit your typical stereotype of a cartel member, to casually sell meth as like a side hustle. Actually, scratch that. It's not a side hustle. It's a massive felony. But the apps normalize the distribution of this illicit drug by framing it as a casual social arrangement. It strips away the traditional stigma of dealing hard drugs and makes it feel highly accessible and low risk.
So, if platform moderation is structurally failing to protect the wider community, and the human cost is as high as we've seen, we really must look at the objective data for a proven systemic intervention. How do we actually break this cycle and shatter this digital sanctuary? Well, when we compare the possible interventions side by side, it becomes pretty clear. Platform moderation, as we just discussed, is easily bypassed. And while community outreach and public health interventions are absolutely vital for the long-term healing of addicts, the data indicates they simply cannot stop the active open dealing right now. Therefore, the sources point to targeted sting operations as the absolute primary approach. It's the only method that provides the immediate impact necessary to dismantle these active supply chains that are hiding in plain sight on the apps.
Now, the mechanics of an ethical sting operation are highly structured and super specific. By following these precise steps, law enforcement can successfully bypass the digital sanctuary. First, officers monitor public profiles for those specific coded emojis, like the crystal diamond or that capital T. That public display serves as probable cause. Second, they enter the private messages to respond directly to the dealer's open advertisement. And finally, they execute a controlled buy in the real world to gather irrefutable legal evidence. This tightly targets the supply chain without infringing on the privacy of everyday, law-abiding app users.
Now, a really common concern raised here is entrapment, right? You might be wondering,
Isn't that entrapment? However, the legal sources draw a very sharp distinction here. Ethical stings are not designed to create criminals. They are simply utilized to provide an opportunity to suspects who are already predisposed to committing a crime and, crucially, are already openly advertising their illicit wares. Responding to a public dating profile that features a crystal ball emoji and the phrase "hosting with Tina" is not entrapment. It is a highly effective, totally legal strategy to catch active dealers who are actively seeking buyers.
And the data proves that this method works. Just look at the factual outcomes of Florida's 6-month swipe left for meth timeline. By January 2022, 68 individuals were charged. But here is the most telling statistic of all. Those 68 suspects had a combined 908 prior criminal offenses. 908. This data strongly indicates that these sting operations effectively remove repeat, hardened, and dangerous offenders from our communities rather than just targeting innocent or first-time users.
According to the sources, the ultimate big-picture goal of these operations is what they call reestablishing the fringe status of this behavior. By significantly increasing the perceived risk of dealing online, when a dealer realizes that the person messaging them for a party could actually be an undercover detective, law enforcement aims to completely strip away the comfort of that digital inbox. The theory is that this forces the drug market out of these easily accessible, casual app interfaces and pushes it right back into the high-friction shadows. Reversing the normalization of meth is absolutely key to protecting the surrounding communities.
Which brings us to our final question today. Are we willing to let dating apps remain sanctuaries for a crisis that silently poisons our homes, exposes millions of innocent people to toxic chemicals, and profoundly destabilizes our neighborhoods? I'll leave you with that thought to ponder, because acknowledging the true macro-level cost of these digital drug markets is the very first and only way we can begin to actually address this massive problem. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to look deeper into the data we've covered today. Stay curious and stay safe out there.